one thing I really want your generation to embrace is that the Earth is a closed system. We cannot leave the Earth. There's no place to go.
Today I'd like to bring to your attention a potential fraud on an enormous scale happening in your county. There's now clear evidence of NASA using numerous methods to grossly mislead the public about astronauts being on the International Space Station. During interior ISS scenes from NASA's own live feed, the use of wires, harnesses, green screens, and virtual reality have been detected to achieve the appearance of a weightless environment. Examples of this include astronauts fading in and out of the screen, green screen glitches, grabbing objects that aren't really there, pulling on invisible wires, getting tangled in their harnesses, and even astronauts appearing out of thin air. This begs the obvious question. If they're really up there, why are they using Hollywood techniques to fake the footage? Now, unfortunately, I can't show you these clips in here today, but I will be sending them to you. Moving on, outside the International Space Station, during spacewalks, air bubbles have been recorded on numerous occasions. How is it possible for air bubbles to be present in the vacuum of space? I once questioned astronaut Scott Kelly about this phenomenon. His body language and answers only created more questions. In 2013, astronaut Luca Parmitano nearly drowned during a spacewalk when his helmet filled with water. This happened again just last year. Air bubbles, helmets filling with water, and drowning. Are they in space or are they underwater? Now, what's really interesting is that they train for spacewalks in an underwater pool with a complete ISS replica. Now, surely they aren't filming these spacewalks in an underwater pool and then editing them to appear if they're in space, because that sure would be something, wouldn't it? I'm calling on the Brevard County Commissioners to open a full investigation into NASA's fraudulent practices and use of taxpayer dollars. It costs NASA $3 billion per year to operate the ISS, and if they don't have a darn good explanation as to why they're faking these videos, I and the public would like a darn good explanation as to where our tax money is going. And if they are indeed faking the funk, it is our duty to expose and eliminate this fraudulent and astronomically wasteful ISS program. And look, I know what you're all thinking. The NASA is part of the federal government, and you're just county commissioners. Even if what I'm saying is true, what can you do? But let me remind you, not only is this happening in your county, as public officials, you have the platform and the ability to make a statement or hold a press conference, alerting the public, state, and federal authorities to investigate further. You have the power to start the conversation. Video evidence of everything I described today will be emailed to you all, and I truly hope we can get to the bottom of this. I look forward to the day that $3 billion annual budget is put towards our veterans, our homeless, maybe some of that mental health stuff the young lady just spoke about, and the revitalization of Brevard County. Thank you for your time today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, sir.
I think you're better at ping pong than I am.
Here's how. Just simply use a blue screen. Voila, now you have a bubble of water floating, as if he's in the outer space, inside the ISS.
That TikTok video getting 8 million views in 4 days this week. And here to join me is Justin Harvey, who appears in that viral video. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Shout out to the sponsor of my coverage, National Gold Group. A surging national debt is bullish for gold. The debt ceiling drama ended with nominal budget cuts and a shiny new credit card with no limit for the federal government. A Bank of America senior analyst recently told Wall Street Journal big stock market rally to be followed by big collapse. Are you prepared to protect your retirement savings for at least another year of the current administration? The time for gold is here. Demand is soaring. Let National Gold Group show you options for investing in precious metals like gold and silver in your retirement accounts and for direct delivery. Take advantage of the best deal in precious metals. Mention my channel, Ivory Hecker, and pay no fees when you roll over your IRA and invest your IRA or 401k into physical gold and silver. Qualified accounts will receive our lifetime fee waiver on rollovers through 2023. You can call them at 888-617-5927. That number is down in my description. Get a free investor guide today. National Gold Group is a Consumer Affairs top-rated gold IRA dealer. Call 888-617-5927 and add the power of gold to your portfolio. There's always a risk of loss, and past performance is not indicative of future results.
My pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so you raise questions that I never thought of. I guess a lot of people are like, wait, what is going on with this video footage? First of all, where did you find some of the video footage with the strange glitches?
So that footage is really a collection of things that just investigative journalists and YouTube video makers have collected over the years from NASA's own live feed. You know, as we all know, they usually will put up that live feed and do their spacewalk for everyone to see. And over time, people started catching these things and going, what was that? You know, were those air bubbles? You know, was that a glitch? You know, and I think that the more that the public was able to sort of have the ability to slow the video down and analyze it ourselves is when we really started to say, wait a second, you know, is this a legitimate video? And as you can see, I used in the original edit that I did, I used many more clips kind of showing examples of what I was talking about. But that one there did a pretty good job as well. They showed about half of what I showed.
Wow. Okay, so you have this clip right here that shows a glitch on an apparent green screen.
It costs NASA $3 billion per year to operate the ISS, and if they don't have a darn good explanation as to why they're faking these videos, I and the public would like a darn good explanation as to where our tax money is going.
That's a really weird glitch.
Yes.
Now, I have done a lot of live shots with live feeds for network news, you know, over the 9 years that I was a corporate news reporter. And I have seen somewhat similar glitches. They didn't look quite like that. But when my image was being fed back, my head would get pixelated. So there's a possibility that it's like some sort of glitch in the video feed.
Yes.
And apparently NASA responded to this. We're going to look at what they said.
Yes, they did. And that's a lot of the, you know, to play devil's advocate, that can be possibly what's going on there. I think the question starts to arise more is when we start finding things like the bee or the rat. There was one time there was literally bugs shown in the feed, and this is supposed to be out in space. And I wish I would have mentioned it in my speech, because a lot of people are debating back and forth in the comments, trying to explain some of it away. Others will go, "We'll explain the bee or explain the rodent." You know, there's been other things that we found up there that really show that there's a really good chance they may be filming these in a studio or with different types of technology. The one that gets me is when they're grabbing objects that are literally coming onto screen digitally, and then they grab them in real time. And I think it's something called augmented reality. It may be different than virtual reality. I'm not an expert on that stuff, but I think enough people have picked out enough errors that it's not just, you know, a video glitch here and there.
Why do you think they would fake appearing in the International Space Station?
Well, and that's a really good question. That could be a whole podcast. And just to clarify, a lot of people will say, well, I go out and I can see the station with my telescope or my camera. And that's very true. We're not claiming that there's not something up there. We're just proposing that it's not a space station the size of a football field with humans on it traveling at 17,000 miles per hour. I guess the deeper rabbit hole of that topic goes back to the moon landing, and we don't believe that they have the ability to go higher than quote unquote low Earth orbit, if that's even really a thing. We believe there's some type of limit to how high they can go. That's why that they had to fake the moon landing and the 6 moon missions. And the International Space Station is just another way to further perpetuate the lie of space travel, in our opinion.
I know when I was presented with really bizarre things in regards to the moon landing, which really makes you think, was it faked? And then you think, well, what would the motive be? And there was a space race at the time. And to me, the clear motive of faking it would be to send a message to Russia, right? Because America wants to appear more powerful than Russia. So even if you have to fake it, if you can say, I nailed this landing and your country didn't, you better watch out for us. We own the moon now. Or, that seemed like the motive at that time. And I don't know if I have no idea if there's something to this footage or not in regards to the International Space Station, but
yeah. And what's interesting is that's a very common thing is like the motive and why would they do it? And I try to also, I kind of go back to the lockdowns. A lot of people would say, well, Russia's involved and China, and they're going to space, and this would be some sort of worldwide conspiracy. And then we had the lockdowns, and every country moving lockstep with the same narrative. So now that sort of argument, to me, in my opinion, goes out the window, because I think it'd be very easy for everyone to agree. I think a good thing to point to is Antarctica. We're at war with Russia and all these countries, but there's one thing that they can all agree on, is that no one's allowed to visit and explore Antarctica independently. So whatever's going on down there is a military, basically guarded zone. It would be like sneaking into restricted airspace. You will be escorted out by plane or boat if you get anywhere near the outer ring, or whatever you want to call is that parallel, longitude or latitude wise. So they can agree that no one's allowed to go to Antarctica. And it is my opinion, and many people in this topic, that they're trying to keep us focused in outer space, which may not necessarily exist. The outer part, this deep, endless idea of infinity and blackness, we may just be in sort of a kind of think of it like the Truman Show, or like a snow globe, or like the sky is sort of the limit. There is a limit, and it is the sky. And the outer lands beyond Antarctica that Admiral Byrd spoke of, that he found, we think that's what they're trying to deter us from. So if we're constantly looking at the ISS and space aliens and the new UFO disclosure, and we're always talking about aliens up there, we will never go find the hidden continents, potentially dozens more. I put it this way, Truman is much easier to control if he has no idea that there's anything else out there. And the last thing they need is 8 billion Trumans going, hold on, there's something beyond Antarctica? What is Admiral Byrd talking about? Why do you want us focused on space so much? So I think that's more so the motive than a sort of a space race with Russia.
Isn't Admiral Byrd the one who wrote in his diary that he had discovered inner Earth, and then
yes,
that's
probably the same one, because he explored Antarctica, I believe, in the 50s for the U.S. Navy, and they did a bunch of different experiments. You can look into Operation High Jump, Operation Dominic, Deep Freeze, I believe is the name. There's a bunch of different experiments down there in Antarctica, and it's very interesting because he claims of finding a landmass the size of America that no human has ever explored before, and that it's green and lush, and there's some very strange theories, and it may not just be an icy continent at the bottom of the globe with just penguins. They're not allowed to fly over it. We're not allowed to go anywhere near there because it's too dangerous, right? But we think that there's something much deeper going on there than it is than we're told, just penguins and cold weather.
Wow. Okay, let me show some footage of these air bubbles in space that you're referring to.
Air bubbles have been recorded on numerous occasions. How is it possible for air bubbles to be present in the vacuum of space? I once questioned astronaut Scott Kelly about this.
Okay, so all of that debris going off, whatever,
Yeah, and to play devil's advocate, some of that could be some sort of leak in a system, but the single bubbles are the ones that really get me. And when I asked Scott Kelly about this, another video that went a little viral in 2018, he was very nervous and fidgety and was telling me that there were flecks of paint chipping off of the side of the space station, and that's what we were seeing.
I have that. I have that clip. Here it is.
So many times during spacewalks outside the International Space Station, we can see air bubbles rising up. Can you touch on how there are air bubbles in space?
Can you be more specific? Air bubbles?
So yeah, like a lot of times during the footage, the NASA footage, you can see bubbles coming up out of the helmets or kind of from underneath you. How do you explain bubbles in space?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about. Now sometimes you get water in the helmet, and it's either from sweat or from the cooling garments. And in some of my spacewalks, I had like water in the helmet, not like I was going to drown in the helmet, but just little bits of water probably came from sweat. Often on the outside of the space station, you'll liberate little pieces of, it's a really harsh environment out there, and the outside of the space station gets beat up pretty good. And sometimes, you'll see just little flecks of paint or something that you might have disrupted floating away from the suit. And, that's generally what that is. I've never seen any kind of air bubble anywhere.
Yeah. Could it be that you're filming in an underwater pool and you're not really out there?
You got us.
All right, well, I just encourage everyone to look up bubbles in space, #bubbles in space. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You spent $45 to sit there.
I got him free.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So yeah, if you can see, he's kind of fidgeting there, and he gives the typical, justification or the explanation that it's flecks of paint. These things add up, and you start to wonder what's really going on. You listen to some of the footage of the spacewalk, it sounds like you're underwater. Compare it with someone scuba diving, and those same sounds of like underwater is what you're hearing. We've got astronauts drowning almost in space. We believe that they're filming it under that neutral buoyancy lab in Houston, and they basically do their training down there and they film it. There's even one clip where they go to close the visor and you can see a reflection of the camera operator, and they appear to be in a skin tight black suit. Looks like a scuba diver to me. So some people will say, it's a little too blurry to say, but these things are really, really starting to add up. And then you go back and you go, well, what was NASA doing in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s? And you find these old videos when they're supposed to be in space, and this guy's head will pop into the screen, and his head is bigger than the spacecraft, proving that it's a model. And it's literally, they're showing you a model in a room, and the guy's head came in the frame. You see his glasses, and he pops up and he's like, oops, and then he hides. And it's like, these are literal bloopers from decades ago of them faking these space missions. And when you go back and really dig into them, you almost kind of are like, oh my gosh, I believe this. Like, it's kind of going back and you look at the entire V schedule and you're like, wait, it's just the COVID V, right? And then you go back and you're like, oh crap, this is much deeper than I thought. Same thing with this. You look at the moon landing and you're like, okay, they faked the moon missions. Well, go look, try to find out some proof behind the Hubble, behind the ISS. Try to find a real photograph of the Earth from space. That's the real kicker. One of the things that got me into this was that famous picture on your iPhone that everyone grew up with is not a real photograph. Why wouldn't you just use a real one? We've got tens of thousands of satellites, some that can take pictures of things 20 million light years away. But you haven't, in 50 years, you haven't turned one of those around to take a picture of the Earth. You had to use a composite. And those aren't my words. NASA's own data visualizer, Robert Simmons, said, we piece it together and I draw the clouds on and I use the Photoshop tool and I paint the oceans the way I think they would look. They're literally using computer generated images. And before that, it was paintings. So you really have to ask yourself, have we ever been high enough to take a photograph of the entire Earth? They don't appear that they're able to.
Wow. That's crazy. Yeah. So going to the moon, I can see how America had an incentive to appear more powerful than Russia. But with the International Space Station, Russia and America literally collab on that. Right. So I'll show the underwater training facility clips that you were talking about.
Are they in space or are they underwater? Now, what's really interesting is that they train for spacewalks in an underwater pool with a complete ISS replica. Now, surely they aren't filming these spacewalks in an underwater pool and then editing them to appear if they're in space, because that sure would be something, wouldn't it?
We definitely have the technology to create,
Yep.
visuals like that. Obviously, you've seen Hollywood movies, so yeah.
Yeah, and this is personally my opinion why we never went back to the moon, because it's difficult to do this and people not play it back and go, wait a second, we lost all the footage from the moon landing. The lander looks like a 7th grade science project with paper mache and big gaps in it. There's no way it went through the Van Allen radiation belts. I mean, let's be real. I stood next to people in the Washington, D.C. Air and Space Museum, and I remember looking at a couple and I was like, you really think they went 238,000 miles in that thing? And he was like, he gave me this look like, it does seem like ridiculous. Like that looks like a aluminum foil. So, I mean, they lost all the footage. They haven't been back in 50 years. Every time they ask Buzz Aldrin, he gives some strange answer, like he wants to tell us that they never went. The astronauts press conference when they get back look like they just got a life sentence. You just went to the moon. You'd be jumping out of your skin, and they're like this.
I did see that clip. I wish I could find it. Yeah.
It like hurts you because you can tell that they're being forced to lie. You can see it in them. And it's like they didn't tell them until a couple days before or something. Like they really thought they were going because they look so distraught. And it just, you go back and then you play it back and you find the guy's head popping next to the model and all the things. You're just like, wow, they really, really got us with this space thing. We call it, Disney is for kids and NASA is like Disney for adults.
Wow. Well, I know more people than ever seem to distrust the government more than ever. And, a lot of us are doubting a lot these days. So it's just an intriguing thing to ask questions about. I think that's why it got 8 million views on TikTok this week. And it originally went viral in April with millions of views back then, which brings me to the fact that AP did an article. You made such a splash that AP did a whole article on your testimony. And they got a response from NASA. Let me show this. Social media posts falsely claim space station footage is faked. And the AP's assessment, false. A spokesperson for NASA and space science experts say the footage is legitimate and that there is ample evidence to show that there are real people on the massive research complex floating above Earth. Additionally, examples cited as proof of an elaborate hoax are easily explained. Footage of astronauts in spacesuits working underwater is from training exercises at NASA, for example, and video glitches are due to satellite transmission interruptions. It is strange. Like, why would you train underwater? I don't know, but
they say it's the closest environment that they can find to a vacuum, which I guess makes sense because you're kind of weightless, but it's kind of two birds with one stone. They can do their training and they can film all the real stuff too while they're down there.
Okay, I highlighted this statement from NASA. This is the NASA spokesperson.
Oh, good. Yeah, I want to talk about this. So go ahead.
Quote, at no time have props, green screens, wires, or simulated underwater facilities substituted for actual real-time operation on the space station, Sandra Jones, a Houston-based spokesperson, wrote in an email Thursday that also included links to the agency's blog about the crew's activities, as well as its Spot the Station tracking tool. All right, what's your reaction?
All right, so translation. Here we are let's send it over to the Pfizer executive, and it is safe and effective. You all can trust the science. Don't worry, all those claims are misinformation and patently false. Here's a fact check. I would just encourage everyone to look into everything I'm saying. I don't want anyone to just believe me, but I definitely don't want you to just trust the science, because we did that with the medical system, and I'm really afraid that we may have done the same thing with our space science. And until we turn over every stone and get some real transparency, like I said, it's kind of like the pictures of the Earth. When you go, oh, well, the data's there. There's all these systems in place, all this science, all these people. I know that all the V's are safe, right? All these kids have been getting them. And then you go, oh, my gosh, Del Bigtree and Bobby Kennedy tried to sue them, and there's no science. There is no science. So the entire system's flawed. I'm here to tell you that we're looking at the same formula. We're looking at a lot of people. Neil deGrasse Tyson is Peter Hotez. there's systems in place. I'm a consensus scientist. We got to just trust these guys. When you go turn over the stones, you'll see that, oh my gosh, there really are just repeating what the other guys have been telling them to say. I tried to contact Sandra Jones with NASA. She's a nice young girl, public affairs officer. She probably got that job from being an intern, and she blocked me. I said, can we have a conversation? I said, I saw the article. I was the one who gave the speech. I'd love to just talk about some of the discrepancies that we're finding in these videos. When she found my message, she blocked me on Facebook and Instagram, I think. So apparently their public affairs officer is not dealing with the public too much. So all we're getting is her statement in a fact check.
Well, you've definitely been trying to get some serious answers on this from the people who would know. I have this clip of you talking to astronaut Sandra Fisher as well.
Is Justin?
Justin?
Yes.
I-N?
Yes, with an I-N.
Where are you from, Justin?
Orlando.
Oh,
Yeah.
You're not far from home.
Not too far. No, I'm okay on a picture, but thank you. I do have a question, though.
Sure.
Sometimes when we're watching the ISS footage, you'll see the astronauts sometimes connected to like wires and harnesses. Is that to keep them like in the frame during the broadcast, or what's the reason for that?
No, I haven't actually. You mean while they're inside the shuttle?
Yeah, like when they're inside the ISS, sometimes during the feeds, the broadcasts, you'll see
do the
kind of
yes, it
pulling
probably-
on their belts or something like that.
I bet that is. I bet that is. I have not personally seen that.
Oh, really?
But I know that they try to be still when they're doing
Right.
talking to someone, and then they usually try to release and do like a flip at the end
Yeah,
or something like
because
that.
I've seen the
Yeah.
flip before, and it almost looked like a foot was caught like inside something, but there was nothing really there. It was really strange. I didn't know if there was something to kind of like hold them in place or something.
We never had anything like
Oh,
that,
okay.
but they may have learned over time that it was hard to stay still, and they may
Yeah.
have come up with something.
Did you ever think the public would find out that all the spacewalks were filmed underwater? Did you have any comment on that?
Well, we train underwater.
Oh, okay, but only training?
Only training.
Okay.
Most of the public have no idea that the ISS is located in an underwater neutral buoyancy lab in Houston, Texas. The space station footage that they trick us with is not travelling at 17,500 miles per hour above your head. It's all being filmed here on Earth. An exact ISS replica underwater. Coincidence? It's a pretty simple process. Film your footage underwater, remove the water layer, add in your CGI Earth layer, and cast your spell.
Oh my gosh.
So quick shout out to Hibbler Productions. That was a clip from the film Level With Me. You can watch at levelwithmefilm.com. That was a way, a sort of a trick that I've learned is to ask these people who I believe are lying a loaded question to get them to trip up. So I basically asked it in a way that people already knew that they were on harnesses and wires and wanted her to explain why they were. And she just kind of, fumbles around. And that's really my goal, is to just kind of see what they'll say. Because as you can see in the video clips, they're clearly hanging on to things. There's stuff pulling on their shirt. And if they're in a weightless environment, you wouldn't need all of this stuff to hold you up and keep you in place. There's even a funny video where they'll drop things and they call it a gravity pocket. Because things aren't supposed to fall, but they'll drop them and you'll see the guy look at the camera like, oh my gosh, that just happened on film. We're not supposed to have, gravity, but they do. There's another clip where the guy will say, he's talking to the public, they'll call the space station and he says, we're about however many miles from talking to you here across the country. And he says it like he's in Massachusetts or something. He says across the country, like he's on land, not up in the sky. So it's just interesting when you catch these people, and I like to ask them questions like that and keep them in the hot seat.
Wow. Well, good for you. You give us a lot to think about, stuff that we had never thought we needed to think about. Okay, real quick before you go, what's your take on this congressional hearing on UFOs that just happened?
Sounds like the Hunter Biden story is getting too popular, right?
They need a distraction.
I don't know. I mean, it's funny because I sort of got into the truth community and the rabbit hole in 2012 because of UFOs and aliens. But then I just drifted away from that because I found the more important things, I think, that were more pressing, like our health and the money and history. But I've started to just come to terms that, like, the alien thing is more of a distraction. I think it's very likely that they'll use this as sort of a final card. If they can't get their one world government with pandemics and terrorism, then they'll just use a threat that all of the world has to unite against, that Reagan has used in his famous speech. We actually go into that topic in depth in the Level With Me film. But I think we're getting prepped for that. I think for the last few decades, we've been with so many movies, Independence Day, and the public is primed for an alien invasion at this point. And then maybe that's what they do for the next lockdown or the next totalitarian power grab. But I would just encourage everyone to think twice. They have the technology to make stuff appear up there that's not even real. So just use your discernment if something strange happens.
Wow. Well, thanks for giving all your insight on this. Now, by the way, before we go, did the county commissioners there in Florida ever do anything with what you told them?
So they didn't. As expected, they essentially ignored me. I pressed on one that was kind of her area, was NASA, and her assistant finally responded, and they directed me to Congress and to NASA. And as you saw, NASA gave me my own personal fact check, which I'm pretty proud of. We all know these days the fact checks usually age pretty well. So hopefully in a couple years it ages pretty well.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. How can people follow what you're up to?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram, Justin_WeAreChange. And I'm also on Facebook, YouTube, We Are Change Orlando.
Awesome. All right. All the best to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.